Might be a fabulous thing. Oh. Good afternoon. Why don't we get started? I'll ask folks to take a seat. Just a couple of housekeeping items so Dr. Clary doesn't get mad. As a reminder, this meeting is going to be recorded and available online for the next 3 months. I'll try to hit the highlights of these housekeeping things. HPBA is pleased to offer a lactation room. Please visit the registration desk for more information. There's a gender neutral restroom near the Poinciana rooms out there. Members are encouraged to attend the business meeting from 6 to 6:30 this evening in the general session room. And don't forget the HPBA 2024 World Cup soccer tournament tonight at 6:30 on the Americana lawn. I hope there's an orthopedic surgeon somewhere in the crowd. Okay, so but on to the really critical thing. For those of you who don't know, I'm John Mansour from UT Southwestern in Dallas, Texas, and it is my distinct pleasure to introduce Dr. Taylor Ryle as our featured speaker for the 2024 HPBA State of the Art Lecture. Many of us know Dr. Ryle as a professor in the Department of Surgery at the University of Arizona College of Medicine and the chief of Division of Surgical Oncology. We also know her as the Associate Director of Oncology Services at the University of Arizona Cancer Center. There are a smaller number of us in this room who are fortunate enough to know her as a friend, a colleague, maybe even a coach. But I know Taylor Ryle as somebody who's been teaching me lessons for nearly 2 decades from afar. We've known Dr. Ryle for the last 2 decades as an expert in pancreatobiliary surgery, teaching us about comparative effectiveness and health outcomes research, periambulary cancers, predictors of cancer outcomes, and helping us understand the components of quality clinical cancer care. And that work is translated into more than 200 publications. And standing alone, that impact just by itself makes her a leader in the world of hepatobiliary surgery. But her 2018 presidential address for the SUS really marked a new milestone in the way we could learn from her experience. Dr. Ryle allowed us to know her in a different way. This triathlete with an extraordinary level of professional dedication and focus, even among a room of hepatobiliary surgeons, shared her journey trying to refocus the activities of her own life. Her unforgettable address and some of the subsequent work that's come from that has taught us about the importance of aligning our own values with the way we do our work. And many of us have been irreversibly impacted by the message that she delivered. She's worked to expand the impact of that message by embarking on a professional coaching career where she continues to multiply her influence. And today we have yet another opportunity to learn from Dr. Ryle. I know we're all looking forward to this address when she shares some of the lessons that she's learned being a leader, one of the true leaders in the world of research, academic surgery, and clinical medicine. I know that we'll all walk out of this room today knowing a little bit more about Taylor Ryle and knowing a little bit more about how to be effective in our roles as we try to pursue our own leadership endeavors. So colleagues, please join me in welcoming to the podium for the 2024 HPBA State of the Art Lecture, Dr. Taylor Ryle.
For the kind introduction, and thank you for taking the time to call me before this and talk. These are my disclosures. As I prepared for this talk, I spent significant time reflecting on my experiences, and I bring my perspective as a surgeon, as a coach, and a fallible human being. Many of my thoughts today are specific to career success and longevity, but some are intertwined with fulfillment in life because I'm not sure that you can or should separate the two. I have so many sentiments that I'd like to share today, but I condensed it into my top 10 lessons. So lesson 1, technical skills and clinical acumen are certainly necessary for success in your surgical career. However, these skills alone are not sufficient. In my experience as a department chair, a division chief, a friend, and a coach, I've come to understand that lack of technical ability is rarely the reason that a surgeon fails or struggles. In the complex matrixed environments that we work in, a surgeon's emotional intelligence and our ability to communicate effectively, to manage conflict, and to cultivate relationships, I would argue is more critical to our career success. And in training, we don't learn these critical skills, but the good news is that, like suturing and dissecting, these skills can be learned and practiced. It's very important that we have mentors and sponsors throughout our careers, but I would argue that early coaching in a surgical career can set people up for success. Unlike the business world, the traditional use of coaching in surgery is remedial, and its focus is really on the struggling or disruptive surgeon. We often bring coaches in when a situation is very far gone, rather than setting people up to succeed. And coaching has traditionally been viewed as a stigma for surgeons. I think of several scenarios. I've seen time and again a surgeon who starts a new position, and within a few months, you hear all kinds of chatter. The OR nurses, the clinic nurses, the residents, they don't like working with this person. You get patient complaints. This person may be well-intended, and they're often completely unaware of how their interactions affect people around them. Impressions, and especially first impressions, make a huge difference. And once that occurs, it's hard to walk that back. I also think of the new surgical leader, whether that's a division chair or a chief, and the skills that got you that position, being a good surgeon, writing a lot of grants, having innovative research, are not the skills that you need to succeed as a leader. I've also seen residents and faculty struggle with lack of self-confidence or imposter syndrome, and their inability to manage themselves and respond effectively to stress basically compounds that. You know, they get progressive loss of confidence, and it starts a death spiral that we have all seen. I would argue that coaching should be used as a developmental tool early in a surgeon's career. I think coaching can take good surgeons or leaders and make them great. Lesson 2, to communicate effectively, manage conflict, and cultivate relationships, you first need to be able to manage yourself. We can't control many things in our environment, but we get to control how we respond to our circumstances. Viktor Frankl said that between stimulus and response, there's a space. And in that space lies our freedom and our power to choose our response. But in our fast-paced lives and in the stress inherent in the career that we have chosen, it can be incredibly difficult to remember that we have a choice. They may not be easy choices, but in every situation, we have a choice. It can also be incredibly difficult to find that elusive space between stimulus and response. And it can be even more difficult to even think of a different way to respond when our automatic visceral response is so ingrained. I've spoken many venues about my experience with burnout in my surgical career. And it's what prompted me to become an executive coach. And in my coaching program, we learned a model called energy leadership. And you can use a lot of different models, but what this model taught me, it describes 7 levels of energy or awareness, and it provided a language and a framework and a structure for me to improve my self-awareness, improve my emotional intelligence, to find that elusive space between stimulus and response. And it allowed me to stop being a victim of my circumstances and recognize that I was the only one that could create the life that I wanted. I talk to many people who complain about somebody else's behavior or the effect of somebody else's behavior on them. And they want that person to change. I tell them that can't be the goal. You can't change them. You can only change yourself. But what's really interesting is that when you change your behavior, people often respond differently. I'm struck at the last 10 years, as I've changed the way I show up, the way the world responds to me has changed as well. And the ability to respond to the challenges that are inherent in our life are really at the core of our well-being. What's remarkable to me is that If I look back over my life at the last 10 years, nothing in my external environment has changed. And I would argue that my current position and the events of my life over the last few years are infinitely more stressful. But the only thing that changes my ability to respond in a way that promotes my well-being. Lesson 3, being right isn't enough. So being right is a big thing for surgeons. I like to be right. We're often making critical decisions with limited information, and it's very important that we're right. But we bring that to a lot of parts of our personal and professional lives where it may not be as important that we're right. And so I think you have to learn to choose your battles wisely. You have to decide when it's really important to be right. When I look back, there was a period of time where my whole world was black and white. It was good or bad, right or wrong. My dad used to say, she doesn't suffer fools well. I was that surgeon who was walking around saying things like, this is unacceptable, right? And steamrolling over anyone who didn't have the same opinion that I had. And even if I was right, which I often was, but people couldn't hear me because they were too busy running for cover. So you need to choose your battles wisely. You need to decide when it's really important to be right. And when it is important to be right, you need to hear other people's perspectives, and you need to learn to communicate in a way that people can hear you. Because if you don't, you've lost the battle before you even start. Lesson 4, you need to lead by influence. So the power bestowed by any title, be that division chief, department chair, chief resident, is limited. I used to joke when I was a department chair that I was just middle management. And in the complex healthcare systems that we work in, our success is inextricably linked to the success of people around us. The success of our teams in the operating rooms, individuals, our departments and our divisions are inextricably linked. We can't succeed if others don't succeed. And so we have to lead by influence. We have to be able to learn to communicate our vision effectively. And we have to inspire people to follow us. We can't make them or order them to. And we have to compel them to that vision, and we have to make each person feel valued for their unique contribution to that. And that's true across the organization, whether you're leading up, down, or across. Dr. Courtney Townsend, who's one of my great mentors, always told me that Caesar wasn't killed by strangers. So, you know, there's people who manage up really well, but you have to take care of your team. You need to know them as human beings. You need to understand what makes them feel valued. You have to set expectations. You have to let them know when they disappoint you, and you have to let them know when you're proud. And you have to provide them opportunities and set them up to succeed. Lead by example. I don't ask my people to do anything that I'm not willing to participate in as well. And I model the behaviors that I want to see. And creating a team that will go the extra mile with you and for you is critical. Lesson 5, never underestimate the power of consistency. Dr. Townsend used to sign all his emails with KO, KO, and his initials to tell me to keep on keeping on. So I'm actually not very good or naturally talented at anything. I'm not that smart. I'm not that technically a gifted surgeon. I'm terrible at any sport that has a ball. And while I like to run, I'm actually not really built for distance or speed. What usually sets me apart is that I'm just willing to work really hard. Dr. Townsend always says, don't bet against her, because he knows I'll keep on keeping on. I recently watched a video by Simon Sinek on the power of consistency. And as I was watching it, I thought, well, this is obvious, but it's actually not that obvious. And in its simplicity, it's actually quite difficult. And he gives an example. He says, if you want to get in shape and you go to the gym and spend an hour, you wake up the next morning and nothing's changed. So you go the next day and you work out, and guess what? The next morning, nothing changed. And so after a while, people quit. But I guarantee you that if you go to the gym every day for a year, you're going to get in shape. You can't pinpoint the moment that happens, but you will get in shape. I used to think that my superpower was being able to sleep anywhere, anytime. But my superpower is actually consistency. And this is true in every aspect of my life. When I was a resident at Hopkins, I created their pancreas database and it launched my research career. And you could argue that that's timing and opportunity, and there's certainly an element that was, but it was discipline and consistency that allowed me to capitalize on that opportunity. When I met my husband, Charlie, I was worth about negative $150,000. And we, as soon as we could, invested a little bit every month for years and years and years. And it's that consistency that made the difference. When I operate, it's the same thing. It's just constant practice. There are people who are more talented than me and who can wing a marathon, but I can't. The only reason I can run a marathon is because I'm willing to get up every day and run, even when I don't feel like it. People think you need motivation to succeed. And sure, you need motivation to start, but motivation waxes and wanes. Consistency is what gets you where you need to go. It's doing it when you're not motivated. Lesson 6, your priorities inevitably shift over time. So you need to continually reassess your priorities and make the changes needed to realign your priorities with the time and energy that you spend. Surgical careers are hopefully long, and I like to draw an analogy between a surgical career and marriage. I think marriage is hard because it's a long-term commitment. So over the length of that relationship, you and your spouse and your circumstances inevitably change. And you have to work really hard to change and evolve together, or you wake up 10 years later and you realize that you have nothing in common. I think surgical careers are similar. So as we navigate our surgical careers in our lives, our priorities inevitably change. Sometimes those changes are abrupt and we're forced to realign the time and energy that we're spending. But oftentimes those changes are more insidious. They're not in our conscious awareness. And we wake up one day wondering why we're not fulfilled in our current position. And so I think you have to make conscious choices. You have to be aware of those subtle shifts and constantly adjust. There have been many times in my career where I feel like I am juggling too many things, more things than I can juggle safely. And at that time, it's really easy for me to see only the balls I've dropped, the ones that are at my feet. I find myself saying things like, I don't have time for X, Y, or Z. And when I say that, I try now replace, see how that feels. So sometimes when I do that, it's actually not a priority. And then I can just set it down and stop worrying about it. But if it is a priority, then I need to do the hard work of saying, well, what is it that I need to give up to make time to do this? Just going through this exercise helps you consciously set those balls down and only juggle the balls that you can juggle safely. And it helps you get off that treadmill of just feeling like you're not measuring up in every part of your life. And your capabilities also change over time. So I can't do what I could do at 13 or even at 40. I used to joke between 40 and 45, it was a full-time job just to maintain the status quo. Now it's a full-time job just to change the slope of the decline. Well, I joke about it. This has actually been very hard for me to accept, but as you navigate your career and your life, you need to sometimes accept your limitations, whatever the cause. And just because I can't do what I did that many years ago, and because my mind is writing checks that my body can no longer cash, I think, you know, that doesn't mean I can't live my life to its fullest, but it does mean that I sometimes need to reset my expectations and my goals. Lesson 7, throughout our lives and our careers, we all face pivot points that fundamentally change who we are. And how we navigate those pivot points is really fundamental to who we become. In 2018, one of my residents sent me a video on kintsugi. In Japanese, kid means golden and sugi means healing. And kintsugi is a Japanese art form whereby a piece of pottery is wrapped in a cloth and is broken with a hammer. And then it's put to get back together with this beautiful gold leaf filler. The process is introspective and it's deliberate. And the hammer represents those events in our lives that challenge us and change who we are. That cloth is representative of the things that hold us together during those times. And that end product highlights the cracks and is strong and beautiful in its own right. I actually went through this process with my residents. And the hardest part of the process for me, and I suspect for most surgeons, is the part where you need to sit with the pieces. As surgeons, we want to pick up all those pieces, put them together, and hope that nobody noticed. But it's really important to sit with the pieces. You need to decide which pieces fit, which pieces no longer fit, and what you want your life to look like moving forward. When I talk about my experience with burnout, it's actually pretty easy for me to talk about it because I figured out how to put all those pieces back together. But over the last few years, I've had several pivot points in my personal and professional life. After 6 months of incessant coughing and 3 months of treatment for valley fever and 3 bronchoscopies, I was diagnosed with lung cancer in 2021. I had surgery in June. My plan was to start smoking and drinking because clearly my current lifestyle wasn't working. I'm still in the pre-contemplative phase. But in all seriousness, it gave me a lot to consider. And then unfortunately, it coincided with another critical pivot point. So I'd been the interim chair of the department at the University of Arizona for 2.5 years. And the start of the chair search basically coincided with my lung cancer diagnosis, giving me plenty to consider. I actually interviewed when I was out on sick leave. In October of 2021, they hired a new chair of the department. When the worst part of your year is not the lung cancer, it's been a bad year. But as I navigate these pivot points, it was actually really hard for me to even think about coming and giving or preparing this talk because I'm still sitting with those pieces. So I'd like to come here and tell some inspiring story about overcoming adversity, but I can't. I'm still sitting with those pieces. I'm deciding which pieces fit and which pieces don't fit and what I want that to look like. But I want anybody in this audience right now who's dealing with their own pivot points to know that that's okay. That's a natural process and it's important to sit with the pieces. These are just some lessons that are helping me navigate that. Lesson 8, let go of others' expectations and have the courage to define what success looks like for you. At times, it's been really hard for me to come to surgical meetings. I used to say to Charlie, it's like this huge group of people who are afraid of coming in last. Like you hear about the Facebook version of everybody's life. You hear about the number of papers they wrote, their grants, their new leadership positions, the number of Whipples they did last year. And it's really easy to feel like you don't measure up, like your goals, your achievements are not sufficient. And that's especially true if your definition of success falls outside of that traditional model. When I was a chair, I was part of this women's chair group. And their focus, which is laudable, is to advance women in surgery and to have more women chairs. When I didn't get the chair in Arizona, immediately they're like, well, you need to get another chair job. So I started interviewing for these chair jobs and I just stepped back for a second. I was like, gosh, Charlie and I really love living in Tucson. It's where we want to be when the music stops. And I just decided to stop looking for positions right then. And those women and many of my mentors can't fathom the idea that I wouldn't want to be a chair. There are days when I feel like I'm a disappointment to women everywhere. And, I feel like sometimes I have to tell my health story to even justify it, but I shouldn't have to do that. I should have the courage to define what success looks like for me. And right now, my priorities are my family and my health, my happiness. And when the right opportunity comes, I'll know. Lesson 9, don't run from something, run to something. I was coaching one of my clients recently and she asked me, well, how do you know when it's time to leave your job or embark on something new in your career? And I think that you want to do this when that opportunity is something that's aligned with your priorities right now and something that's going to allow you to grow. I always say it's best to look when you don't need a job. But I recognize that that's not always possible. So sometimes people are very unhappy in their job or their current position. If you are, I would encourage you to just pause. And before you make any move, understand why that is. Because if you make a move before that's true, you're almost destined to find the same unhappiness somewhere else. So I think you need to do the hard work. You need to determine your priorities. You need to set boundaries. You need to perhaps let go of the parts of your job or life that no longer serve you, and then potentially be willing to leave that uncomfortable comfort zone. And it's then that you can create new opportunities where you are, or you can take advantage of new opportunities in other places. I think it's always easy to think that the grass is greener on the other side, but in reality, the grass is just different. Different challenges, different opportunities, different frustrations. So some days you just need to decide what kind of grass you like. You need to be really clear on what you want and not what you don't want. And lesson 10 is remember your why. There's so many things in our day-to-day lives that have obscure the reason that we went into medicine. So many things that take us away from clinical medicine and just the stress of what we do and the fast pace. I often ask the medical students who are coming to interview what they think it's like to be a doctor day to day, because I can't even remember what I thought. But I'm sure that whatever my romantic idea of it was wrong. But this is my why. So this is Vaughn. She was diagnosed with hepatocellular carcinoma in 2008, and she underwent a right hepatic lobectomy. I met her in 2018 when she developed pancreatic cancer. She had neoadjuvant chemotherapy, she had surgery, she had adjuvant therapy, and then in 2021, she recurred with a local recurrence actually, and we resected it. And by the end of 2021, she had metastatic disease. Vaughn is a brave and inspiring person and has become a friend. The picture on the upper left is a picture of us in Kona, Hawaii with Vaughn and her family. Her family was going to Hawaii for what was likely their last Christmas all together. And coincidentally, Charlie and I happened to be on the Big Island at the same time. And her family took Charlie and I out and just to thank me for everything I had done. Vaughn wrote a memoir. I'm in her memoir. The picture on the right is me at her book signing in October of 2022. My photo actually made it to her book. Vaughn died on January 3rd of 2023. I was part of her memorial service, and I still talk to her family very regularly. This is Charles. Charles had a Whipple in 2020 for pancreatic cancer. He's 80, and he rides his bike 60 plus miles a week. Just a few weeks ago, he saw me out on the path. I actually didn't see him. He passed me on his bike, and he sent me this text message, and it just made my day. This is a picture of Charles and I at the University of Arizona game where he represented our program and he represented our cancer survivors. I remember when I got sick, I had to cancel my clinic to go get a PET scan. And the day after, I had to cancel Charles's appointment. And the day after, he contacted me and he just wanted to make sure I was okay because he knows I never cancel an appointment. So he and I have shared in each other's journeys and helped navigate life and uncertainty together. On the bottom right, that's him at our National Pancreas Foundation bowling fundraiser. He's as competitive as me. This is John. John had chronic pancreatitis and had a disconnected duct. He has a young son, and when I met him, he had terrible pain and he wasn't able to do any of the things that he wanted to do and couldn't get help in East Texas. He came to the University of Arizona and we did a distal pancreatectomy. And this is a picture with me and John and his family about a year later. John always sends me these awesome text messages of him doing all these things, and he always thanks me for getting his life back. I also know that I've impacted the lives of many residents, students, surgeons, sometimes even strangers. Every once in a while, I'll get an email, text. It's those things that help me remember my why. I think as surgeons, we are masters of delayed gratification. So we think that somehow magically we're going to be happy when we finish medical school, when we finish residency, when we get married, when we retire, whatever that is. But there is no finish line. Life is what's happening while we're busy making other plans. So I would encourage you to be consistent, not only in your activities, but in your values. Do the right thing, maintain your empathy, remember your why, and continually reevaluate your priorities. Don't wish your life away. This past few years have really taught me that living my life to the fullest and working hard are not mutually exclusive. These are photographs from the past year as I slowly work through my ever-evolving bucket list. But these were just so many things I got to do in this past year that brought me joy and connection and strength. Now, I try to take advantage of any opportunity that's aligned with my values, and I try to live my life now. And in the words of Leanne Womack, if I get a chance to sit it out or dance, I dance. And I would encourage you to do the same. Thank you.
Oh my God, there's a plaque. Thanks, Peter.